As you probably know, the UFC has just recently entered into a $7.7 billion deal with Paramount. Now, awesome. That's great to see. Love to see the sport of MMA being recognized by the wider audience. Great for the sport, obviously. Great for the company. You know, congrats to you guys, you money-grubbing losers. But anyways, regardless, $7.7 billion deal, incredible. Now, as they continue with Paramount Plus, I believe that happens sometime next year, I think there are certain things that the UFC really needs to consider as they move from ESPN's kind of time slot restriction to a fully streaming service under Paramount. I'm sure they'll have some televised cards and things like that. But as they continue, I think there are some things that they really need to look at changing, especially as they move away from ESPN. Now, one of the first things I've noticed a lot about this Paramount deal is that it definitely has people talking, not only from the fan of the UFC, you know, the people who are watching every card, who are already tuned in, they know what's going on in the UFC and the sport of MMA and stuff like that. I'm hearing a lot of talk, both online and even in person, from coworkers, friends, and family, that they're definitely interested in the Paramount deal, because a lot of these folks, they've already got Paramount Plus. They're already subscribed. They like the UFC. They don't pay for the cards, though. They'll watch it if it's on, if it's a fight night or something like that, but they don't know who's who in the UFC right now. You know, they're the casual viewer. There is a ton of interest from the casual viewer for this Paramount deal. And I think the UFC really needs to consider how they have their model. Now, if you are a fan of the sport, you've probably definitely heard of Contender Series, Dana White's Contender Series. I think a couple weeks ago was the last week of this year's Contender Series. Now, I think it's its 10th one. It has been some of the best UFC content that we've seen in a while, both in the fights and in the hype that it generates for some of these new fighters as they are making their way onto the UFC scene. So if you don't know, there are quite a few fighters who have gone really far in the UFC. I think there's at least two of them that are champs. JDM, who's the current welterweight champ, was a UFC Contender Series alumni, as well as Sean O'Malley, former bantamweight champ, was a UFC alumni. Marab may have been, I don't remember, probably not. But these guys who first came on through the Contender Series have gone on to have a lot of success in the sport. And it's turned into a great way for new UFC fighters to really make a name for themselves, because as we know, the UFC is dog water at promotions. They don't do any. You kind of have to do it yourself. And if you're not exciting, if you're not a fun finisher, or like you're a crazy sub, or you just have a fun personality, it's really hard. And the Contender Series has been huge for some of these guys to get in there and show what they're made of. We've had some insane fights this season on the Contender Series, you know? And it really allows these guys to get a leg off because they're starting on these 10K contracts, you know? So, Contender Series has been awesome. And I think one of the big things that makes it exciting to watch is the very, very short time frame between fights. Now, if you've watched the UFC at all, if you're, a fan or you're a casual watcher, you know that sometimes the time between fights really can drag on. And that's because the UFC has a time slot that they have to abide by. So normally it's prelims are starting at 6, main card starting at 8. It's a 2-hour time slot of prelims before the main card starts. Now, what happens when you get a bunch of finishes, knockouts, subs, what have you, is that they still can't start the main card until they've reached that time slot. And so now you're stuck with not only some really lame and cheesy talking head, in between fight shows, you're stuck with watching a ton of ads. Now, I don't know about you. I purchase the cards sometimes. And It sucks paying $70 just to watch an exciting finish, right? It's been an awesome fight. And then I get punished because, man, all because of that exciting fight, I have to watch 30 minutes of ads. That pisses me off. It sucks, you know? I think the UFC really needs to understand that the Contender Series is the formula that they should be adopting as they continue under Paramount, especially if it's going to be a streaming-only show. They don't need to fill that time slot of like the whole time. People are not going to be paying for a subscription. They pay the subscription because they don't want ads. They're not going to watch 6 hours of fights where more than probably 2/3 of it is ad space. You know, it makes buying a pay-per-view almost not worth it because I buy them. So, like I'm saying, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Anyways, long breaks between fights, they need to get rid of because the Contender Series has been some of the most fun MMA content that I've seen in a while, not only because of how exciting the fighters are this season, but also because I'm not stuck watching a bunch of lame, stupid shows. I don't care about Gianni's betting stuff, okay? I don't like seeing his weird face and his bright white veneers. I don't care about what Daniel Cormier is saying. I don't really care about Joe Rogan yapping. And I don't like paying $70 to watch Burger King ads, okay? That's all I'm saying. Take a page from the Contender Series and streamline it. If you're doing a streaming service, I would not care if a card ended earlier. I'm on the East Coast. I'm up till 1 a.m. watching these. You're telling me sometimes I can go to bed at 10 on a Saturday? I'm happy, all right? Now, that's the biggest thing I have about it. You know, Contender Series, awesome. Get rid of these talking head shows because I think they're really going to turn off the casual fan as well as ads. If you're paying Paramount Plus for it, it's no ad service. Why are you going to watch something that's forcing you to watch a ton of ads before the next fight? You're just going to tune it to something else. You know what I mean? And then I think the last thing, like I said, the UFC, it's a $7.7 billion deal. Now, I'm not saying they need to change fighter pay to the point to where they're making money like NFL players. I think the pay, well, it could be better, is fair when you're at the level of excitement that you bring to the table, you know? Like there's certain guys, yeah, they start off low contract, but if you're exciting, if you don't turn down fights, if you fill in last minute, UFC seemingly takes good care of those kind of guys. I imagine, you know, someone like Kevin Holland probably sticks around because he makes a ton of money just by accepting last minute fights, you know? He's always down to fight anybody. And so I think the UFC really likes that he is one of those guys that they can rely on, and they probably give him a little more off the side, right? But I think what the UFC really needs to do is they need to up the bonuses, not the amount, but the actual bonuses for finishes and subs. Fight of the night, finish of the night, I think should still stick around. That 50K bonus is awesome, and I think that's a huge reward and incentive. But I think there should be something like a 20K bonus for any finish and sub on that card. The UFC is an entertainment company. If they want entertainment, they need to incentivize it, right? Like a fighter, if they want to make a career in this sport, and there's a way where they can do it without taking minimal damage, even if it's boring, they're probably going to do that because they know they're getting paid not that much. So why risk it and get injured or hurt really badly where you have to sit out for an entire year? You're on a 10K contract. If you win, lucky you, that's 20K, you know? You want to be healthy so you can accept the fight later in the year. But if you've got a chance, if you know you've got power in your hands and you've got a chance, or you're good at your, ground game, you're wrestling, you have a way to get a submission. If you know that you can double, what you're making in a single night just by pushing that pace or taking on somebody like that, why wouldn't you? If the UFC wants exciting fighters to be exciting, they have to incentivize it, So I really think that the UFC should consider upping the amount of bonuses they give out. It doesn't have to be 50K every finish, something like 20K. I think for a fighter on a 10K contract, doubling their win money like that night, that's huge. That's awesome. It allows those guys a little bit of breathing room to get better as they continue in the sport, you know? And I think that's the biggest reason that we don't have the level of skill that other sports do yet is because it's not incentivized. You know, obviously there's a reason why every UFC fighter wants to do boxing. It pays more, you know? Even if they know they're going to lose, losing for a few million is definitely better than losing for a few 100,000, all right? So it's no surprise that these guys want to go do boxing after they're done with the UFC, right? But I think the UFC, obviously, for its champions and stuff like that, yeah, up the pay, sure. If you want to up the pay for your lower level guys, that's fine too. I think that would incentivize fighters from, you know, other areas going to the UFC, because that's where the money would be. It would incentivize fighters who are looking at, you know, say really athletic guys who are looking towards the NFL, maybe even choosing UFC or MMA as an alternative option. You know what I mean? Dudes who are legends in wrestling might consider making a run in the UFC because it pays more. But that's not, you know, that's a idea for the UFC for them to pursue. I'm obviously not a money man. It's just what I think would happen in the sport. And these are just some of my thoughts about what I think the UFC should look into as they go to this Paramount Plus model. I think it would be more exciting for the casual viewer. Definitely be more exciting and fun to watch for me, who catches every card. So I think that's just something hopefully that they have already considered, you know. So if you like the video, leave me a comment, subscribe, like it. Let me know what you think, and I will see you at the next one.